Let us talk about time measuring and estimations. Welcome to our channel. A watch is a portable timepiece intended to be carried or worn by a person. It is designed to keep a consistent movement despite the motions caused by the person's activities. A wristwatch is designed to be worn around the wrist, attached by a watch strap or other type of bracelet, including metal bands, leather straps, or any other kind of bracelet. A pocket watch is designed for a person to carry in a pocket, often attached to a chain. Watches were developed in the 17th century from spring-powered clocks, which appeared as early as the 14th century. During most of its history, the watch was a mechanical device, driven by clockwork, powered by winding a mainspring, and keeping time with an oscillating balance wheel. These are called mechanical watches. In the 1960s, the electronic quartz watch was invented, which was powered by a battery and kept time with a vibrating quartz crystal. By the 1980s, the quartz watch had taken over most of the market from the mechanical watch. Historically, this is called the quartz revolution, also known as quartz crisis in Switzerland. Developments in the 2010s include smartwatches, which are elaborate computer-like electronic devices designed to be worn on a wrist. They generally incorporate timekeeping functions, but these are only a small subset of the smartwatch's facilities. In general, modern watches often display the day, date, month, and year. For mechanical watches, various extra features called complications, such as moon phase displays and the different types of tourbillon, are sometimes included. Most electronic quartz watches, on the other hand, include time-related features such as timers, chronographs, and alarm functions. Furthermore, some modern watches, like smartwatches, even incorporate calculators, GPS, and Bluetooth technology or have heart rate monitoring capabilities, and some of them use radio clock technology to regularly correct the time. Most watches that are used mainly for timekeeping have quartz movements. However, expensive collectible watches, valued more for their elaborate craftsmanship, aesthetic appeal, and glamorous design than for simple timekeeping, often have traditional mechanical movements, despite being less accurate and more expensive than their electronic counterparts. As of 2018, the most expensive watch ever sold at auction was the Patek Philippe Henry Graves Super Complication, the world's most complicated mechanical watch until 1989, fetching $24 million, $23,237,000 Swiss francs, in Geneva on November 11, 2014. As of December 2019, the most expensive watch ever sold at auction, and wristwatch, was the Patek Philippe Grandmaster Chime REF 6300A010, fetching $31.19 million, 31 million Swiss francs, in Geneva on November 9, 2019. Watches evolved from portable spring-driven clocks, which first appeared in 15th century Europe. The first timepieces to be worn, made in the 16th century beginning in the German cities of Nuremberg and Augsburg, were transitional in size between clocks and watches. Nuremberg clockmaker Peter Henlein, or Henel or Heel, 1485 to 1542, is often credited as the inventor of the watch. However, other German clockmakers were creating miniature timepieces during this period, and there is no evidence Henlein was the first. A rise in accuracy occurred in 1657 with the addition of the balance spring to the balance wheel, an invention disputed both at the time and ever since between Robert Hooke and Christian Huygens. This innovation increased watches' accuracy enormously, reducing error from perhaps several hours per day to perhaps 10 minutes per day, resulting in the addition of the minute hand to the face from around 1680 in Britain and around 1700 in France. The increased accuracy of the balance wheel focused attention on errors caused by other parts of the movement, igniting a two-century wave of watchmaking innovation. The first thing to be improved was the escapement. The verge escapement was replaced in quality watches by the cylinder escapement, invented by Thomas Tompion in 1695 and further developed by George Graham in the 1720s. Improvements in manufacturing, such as the tooth-cutting machine devised by Robert Hooke, allowed some increase in the volume of watch production, although finishing and assembling was still done by hand until well into the 19th century. A major cause of error in balance wheel timepieces, caused by changes in elasticity of the balance spring from temperature changes, was solved by the bimetallic temperature-compensated balance wheel invented in 1765 by Pierre Leroy and improved by Thomas Earnshaw, 1749 to 1829. The lever escapement, the single most important technological breakthrough, though invented by Thomas Mudge in 1759 and improved by Josiah Emery in 1785, only gradually came into use from about 1800 onwards, chiefly in Britain. The British predominated in watch manufacture for much of the 17th and 18th centuries, but maintained a system of production that was geared towards high-quality products for the elite. The British Watch Company modernized clock manufacture with mass production techniques and the application of duplicating tools and machinery in 1843. In the United States, Aaron Lufkin Dennison started a factory in 1851 in Massachusetts that used interchangeable parts, and by 1861 a successful enterprise operated, incorporated as the Waltham Watch Company. Watches were not widely worn in pockets until the 17th century. One account suggests that the word watch came from the Old English word woaki, which meant watchman, because town watchmen used the technology to keep track of their shifts at work. Another says that the term came from 17th century sailors, who used the new mechanisms to time the length of their shipboard watches, duty shifts. The concept of the wristwatch goes back to the production of the very earliest watches in the 16th century. In 1571 Elizabeth I of England received a wristwatch, described as an armed watch, from Robert Dudley. The oldest surviving wristwatch, then described as a bracelet watch, is one made in 1806 and given to Josephine de Beauharnais. From the beginning, wristwatches were almost exclusively worn by women. Men used pocket watches up until the early 20th century. In 1810, the watchmaker Abraham Louis Braidwood made a wristwatch for the Queen of Naples. The first Swiss wristwatch was made by the Swiss watchmaker Patek Philippe, in the year 1868 for Countess Koskauas of Hungary. Wristwatches were first worn by military men towards the end of the 19th century, having increasingly recognized the importance of synchronizing maneuvers during war without potentially revealing plans to the enemy through signaling. The Garston Company of London patented a watch wristlet design in 1893, but probably produced similar designs from the 1880s. Officers in the British Army began using wristwatches during colonial military campaigns in the 1880s, such as during the Anglo-Burma War of 1885. During the First Boer War of 1880 to 1881 the importance of coordinating troop movements and synchronizing attacks against highly mobile Boer insurgents became paramount, and the use of wristwatches subsequently became widespread among the officer class. The company Mappin and Webb began production of their successful campaign watch for soldiers during the campaign in the Sudan in 1898 and accelerated production for the Second Boer War of 1899 to 1902 a few years later. In continental Europe, Gerard Périgord and other Swiss watchmakers began supplying German naval officers with wristwatches in about 1880. Early models were essentially standard pocket watches fitted to a leather strap, but by the early 20th century, manufacturers began producing purpose-built wristwatches. The Swiss company Demierfrères and CIE patented a wristwatch design with the now standard wire lugs in 1903. In 1904, Louis Cartier produced a wristwatch to allow his friend Alberto Santos Dumont to check flight performance in his airship while keeping both hands on the controls, as this proved difficult with a pocket watch. Cartier still markets a line of Santos Dumont watches and sunglasses. In 1905, Hans Wilsdorf moved to London and set up his own business, Wilsdorf and Davis, with his brother-in-law Alfred Davis, providing quality timepieces at affordable prices. The company became Rolex in 1915. Wilsdorf was an early convert to the wristwatch, and contracted the Swiss firm Igler to produce a line of wristwatches. The impact of the First World War of 1914 to 1918 dramatically shifted public perceptions on the propriety of the man's wristwatch and opened up a mass market in the post-war era. The creeping barrage artillery tactic, developed during the war, required precise synchronization between the artillery gunners and the infantry advancing behind the barrage. Service watches produced during the war were specially designed for the rigors of trench warfare, with luminous dials and unbreakable glass. The War Office began issuing wristwatches to combatants from 1917. By the end of the war, almost all enlisted men wore a wristwatch, or wristlet, and after they were demobilized the fashion soon caught on. The British Horological Journal wrote in 1917 that the wristlet watch was little used by the sterner sex before the war, but now is seen on the wrist of nearly every man in uniform and of many men in civilian attire. By 1930, the wristwatch vastly exceeded the pocket watch in market share by a decisive ratio of 50:1. Automatic watches. John Harwood invented the first successful self-winding system in 1923. In anticipation of Harwood's patent for self-winding mechanism's expiration in 1930, Glyson founder Eugene Malin started development on a self-winding system as a separate module that could be used with almost any 8.75 Ligny, 19.74 mm, watch movement. Glyson incorporated this module into its watches in October 1930 and began mass-producing automatic watches. Electric watches. The Elgin National Watch Company and the Hamilton Watch Company pioneered the first electric watch. The first electric movements used a battery as a power source to oscillate the balance wheel. During the 1950s, Elgin developed the Model 725 while Hamilton released two models. The first, the Hamilton 500, released on January 3, 1957, was produced into 1959. This model had problems with the contact wires misaligning, and the watches returned to Hamilton for alignment. The Hamilton 505, an improvement on the 500, proved more reliable. The contact wires were removed and a non-adjustable contact on the balance assembly delivered the power to the balance wheel. Similar designs from many other watch companies followed. Another type of electric watch was developed by the Bulova company that used a tuning fork resonator instead of a traditional balance wheel to increase timekeeping accuracy, moving from a typical 2.5 to 4 Hz with a traditional balance wheel to 360 Hz with the tuning fork design. Quartz watches. The commercial introduction of the quartz watch in 1969 in the form of the Seiko Astron 35 SQ and in 1970 in the form of the Omega Beta 21 was a revolutionary improvement in watch technology. In place of a balance wheel which oscillated at perhaps 5 or 6 beats per second, these devices used a quartz crystal resonator which vibrated at 8,192 Hz, driven by a battery-powered oscillator circuit. Most quartz watch oscillators now operate at 32,768 Hz, although quartz movements have been designed with frequencies as high as 262 kHz. Since the 1980s, more quartz watches than mechanical ones have been marketed. Watch parts. The movement and case are the basic parts of a watch. A watch band or bracelet is added to form a wristwatch. Alternatively, a watch chain is added to form a pocket watch. The case is the outer covering of the watch. The case back is the back portion of the watch's case. Accessing the movement, such as during battery replacement, depends on the type of case back, which are generally categorized into 4 types. Snap-off case backs. Press-on case backs. The watch back pulls straight off and presses straight on. Screw-down case backs. Threaded case backs. The entire watch back must be rotated to unscrew from the case. Often it has 6 notches on the external part of the case back. Screw back cases. Tiny screws hold the case back to the case. Unibody. The only way into the case involves prying the crystal off the front of the watch. The crystal, also called the window or watch glass, is the transparent part of the case that allows viewing the hands and the dial of the movement. Modern wristwatches almost always use one of 4 materials: acrylic glass, plexiglass, hesselite glass. The most impact resistant, unbreakable, and therefore used in dive watches and most military watches. Acrylic glass is the lowest cost of these materials, so it is used in practically all low-cost watches. Mineral crystal, a tempered glass. Sapphire-coated mineral crystal. Synthetic sapphire crystal, the most scratch-resistant, it is difficult to cut and polish, causing watch crystals made of sapphire to be the most expensive. The bezel is the ring holding the crystal in place. The lugs are small metal projections at both ends of the wristwatch case where the watch band attaches to the watch case. The case and the lugs are often machined from one solid piece of stainless steel. The movement of a watch is the mechanism that measures the passage of time and displays the current time, and possibly other information including date, month, and day. Movements may be entirely mechanical, entirely electronic, potentially with no moving parts, or they might be a blend of both. Most watches intended mainly for timekeeping today have electronic movements, with mechanical hands on the watch face indicating the time. Electronic movements, also known as quartz movements, have few or no moving parts, except a quartz crystal which is made to vibrate by the piezoelectric effect. A varying electric voltage is applied to the crystal, which responds by changing its shape so, in combination with some electronic components, it functions as an oscillator. It resonates at a specific highly stable frequency, which is used to accurately pace a timekeeping mechanism. Most quartz movements are primarily electronic but are geared to drive mechanical hands on the face of the watch to provide a traditional analog display of the time, a feature most consumers still prefer. Traditionally, watches have displayed the time in analog form, with a numbered dial upon which are mounted at least a rotating hour hand and a longer, rotating minute hand. Many watches also incorporate a third hand that shows the current second of the current minute. In quartz watches the second hand typically snaps to the next marker every second. In mechanical watches, the second hand may appear to glide continuously, though in fact it merely moves in smaller steps, typically 1/5 to 1/10 of a second, corresponding to the beat, half period, of the balance wheel. A digital display shows the time as a number, example 12:08 instead of a shorthand pointing towards the number 12 and a longhand 8/60ths of the way around the dial. The digits are usually shown as a 7-segment display. The first digital mechanical pocket watches appeared in the late 19th century. In the 1920s, the first digital mechanical wristwatches appeared. Talking watches are available, intended for the blind or visually impaired. They speak the time out loud at the press of a button. This has the disadvantage of disturbing others nearby or at least alerting the non-deaf that the wearer is checking the time. Tactile watches are preferred to avoid this awkwardness, but talking watches are preferred for those who are not confident in their ability to read a tactile watch reliably. Wristwatches with analog displays generally have a small knob, called the crown, that can be used to adjust the time and, in mechanical watches, wind the spring. Almost always, the crown is located on the right-hand side of the watch so it can be worn of the left wrist for a right-handed individual. This makes it inconvenient to use if the watch is being worn on the right wrist. Some manufacturers offer left-hand drive, aka distro, configured watches which move the crown to the left side, making wearing the watch easier for left-handed individuals. Customarily, watches provide the time of day, giving at least the hour and minute, and often the second. Many also provide the current date, and some, called complete calendar or triple date watches, display the day of the week and the month as well. However, many watches also provide a great deal of information beyond the basics of time and date. Some watches include alarms. Other elaborate and more expensive watches, both pocket and wrist models, also incorporate striking mechanisms or repeater functions, so that the wearer could learn the time by the sound emanating from the watch. This announcement or striking feature is an essential characteristic of true clocks and distinguishes such watches from ordinary timepieces. This feature is available on most digital watches. A complicated watch has one or more functions beyond the basic function of displaying the time and the date. Such a functionality is called a complication. Two popular complications are the chronograph complication, which is the ability of the watch movement to function as a stopwatch, and the moon phase complication, which is a display of the lunar phase. Other more expensive complications include tourbillon, perpetual calendar, minute repeater, and equation of time. A truly complicated watch has many of these complications at once, see caliber 89 from Patek Philippe for instance. Some watches can both indicate the direction of Mecca and have alarms that can be set for all daily prayer requirements. Among watch enthusiasts, complicated watches are especially collectible. Some watches include a second 12-hour or 24-hour display for UTC or GMT. The similar sounding terms chronograph and chronometer are often confused, although they mean altogether different things. A chronograph is a watch with an added duration timer, often a stopwatch complication, as explained above, while a chronometer watch is a timepiece that has met an industry standard test for performance under predefined conditions. A chronometer is a high-quality mechanical or a thermocompensated movement that has been tested and certified to operate within a certain standard of accuracy by the COSC, Contrôle Officiel Suisse de Chronométrie. The concepts are different but not mutually exclusive, so a watch can be a chronograph, a chronometer, both, or neither. Electronic sports watches, combining timekeeping with GPS and or activity tracking, address the general fitness market and have the potential for commercial success. Garmin Forerunner, Garmin VivoFit, Epson, announced model of Swatch Touch series. Braille watches have analog displays with raised bumps around the face to allow blind users to tell the time. Their digital equivalents use synthesis speech to speak the time on command. Wristwatches and antique pocket watches are often appreciated as jewelry or as collectible works of art rather than just as timepieces. This has created several different markets for wristwatches, ranging from very inexpensive but accurate watches, intended for no other purpose than telling the correct time, to extremely expensive watches that serve mainly as personal adornment or as examples of high achievement in miniaturization and precision mechanical engineering. Traditionally, dress watches appropriate for informal, business, semi-formal, and formal attire are gold, thin, simple, and plain, but increasingly rugged, complicated, or sports watches are considered by some to be acceptable for such attire. Some dress watches have a cabochon on the crown or faceted gemstones on the face, bezel, or bracelet. Some are made entirely of faceted sapphire, corundum. Thank you for watch, stay with us by subscribing.